Arizona football had hope until it didn't, and now things look bleak. Arizona basketball getting a little bit of respect. And I can admit when I'm wrong. Oh, yeah, and it has nothing to do with sports. It has everything to do with classic rock and roll. You're listening to the Wildcat Sports Report Podcast. Arizona was in it. They really were until they weren't. Arizona football fell 34-16 to UCLA over the weekend in a game where they were kind of in it until the third quarter, until unfortunately a very nasty-looking injury to Jordan McLeod. And he'll be out for the season with apparently knee and ankle injuries. McLeod was decent in the game before that, 21-30, 182. No interceptions, probably the best news. He also ran for about 21 yards. But, Arizona was hanging right there. They were down 24-16 when he got hurt. They were moving the ball again quite a bit on offense. They finished the game with only about 360 yards of total offense, but most of that actually occurred prior to the McLeod injury because unfortunately Gunnar Cruz came in, and although the final number is not horrible, 4 of 7 for 48, he did nothing to move the team. He threw 3 really bad incompletions, took some bad sacks, and looked far more like what we call the San Diego State Gunnar Cruz than the BYU Gunnar Cruz. The two things that really seem to continue to plague Arizona is their inability to convert in the red zone. They settled for, I think, 3 field goals on 4 tries. I think the only touchdown came kind of on a trick play, with Jamari Joyner actually throwing the touchdown. Their inability to stop the run. UCLA ran for 329 yards, had 2 ball carriers with over 100 yards. And that's the bigger concern is because DTR, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, was bad. 8 of 19, 82 yards, had a pick. Ran okay for 28 yards. He was bad. So if they had a competent quarterback, Arizona's probably not in this football game. But they didn't. They had DTR, who, again, it perplexes me that going back quite a while now, UCLA doesn't have good quarterbacks. Even Josh Rosen, who was well-regarded coming out of high school, was a first-round draft pick. He was just okay. I didn't get the first-round love for him. I'm not surprised that he is floundered in the NFL. Now, part of that is he's one of these celebrity quarterbacks that you see. But the fact, again, that, the UCLA Bruins, the team that, frankly, if you compare them to their crosstown rivals, USC has had far more successful quarterbacks in the NFL. When you look at guys like Troy Aikman, for example, a NFL Super Bowl winning quarterback, and that USC has produced far more guys like Matt Leinart, Mark Sanchez, guys who great college careers, can play with that talent but get to the NFL and flounder. Maybe Sam Darnold has a chance to turn that around, although again, we will see. So Arizona moves on now. Now they head into a Colorado team that's really bad as well. Let's make no mistake that the Buffaloes are struggling as well. Now, they're not as bad as Arizona. Colorado is 1-4 on the season with a very impressive win over Northern Colorado. They also played Texas A&M really tough. They did hold them to just 10 points with the backup quarterback, that same backup quarterback who ended up beating Alabama. So take that for what it's worth. But talk about a team that has a less potent offense than Arizona. After scoring 35 in the season opener, again, that was against a 1AA team. But again, Arizona lost to a 1AA team. They scored 7 against Texas A&M. They were shut out by Minnesota. They scored 13 against ASU. And they scored 14 against USC. So this is another bad team. Their fan base is freaking out. Again, they're in year 2 of a rebuilding effort that wasn't as bad as Arizona's rebuilding effort. And realistically, looking at Arizona's schedule, this is by far and away the best chance to carve out a win. Now, they've got Washington at home in a week. That's a 2-3 Washington team. Again, they've got Cal coming to Tucson in early November. That is a 1-4 Cal team. Suddenly, Washington State is frisky at 3-3. Utah is Utah. They're a 3-2 team that, again, is better than Arizona. And ASU looks really, really good, as much as we hate to admit it. So, Colorado and Cal seem to be the most likely wins left if Arizona is going to get a win. But again, then they got to get a better gunner crews. They need BYU gunner crews, and eventually they need better than BYU gunner crews. And I don't know if that guy exists, because since then he has been demoted to third string after floundering against San Diego State, then moved back up to second string, and then did not look good against UCLA in the second half. And again, it's tough to come off the bench and get reps. For every Caleb Williams at Oklahoma, there's the quarterback for Penn State who couldn't move the team in a game that they had a chance to beat a very good Iowa team after the starter went down. So you never know what you're going to get. But definitely Arizona needs to try to put together a game plan that benefits crews, that lets them get rid of the ball quickly. And again, frankly, it sounds like Jamari Joyner could have some packages put in for him, which is ironic because it was at Colorado where Khalil Tate, a running quarterback, broke all kinds of records in relief for a more traditional passer, Brandon Dawkins. Now, I'm not saying Jamari Joyner is Khalil Tate. Heck, Gunnar Cruz is definitely not Brandon Dawkins. But it's just kind of fun symmetry. Now, for Joyner, he was a guy, and I'll admit, I never saw him being an NCAA quarterback. I got into some debates with my good friend Mike Luke on the air. He was a big Joyner supporter. Joyner is probably, one of the 5 to 10 best athletes I've ever seen play football in Tucson when covering high school football. But he's not a top 5 quarterback. He, was a guy who had the arm, who had the athleticism. Frankly, he played with superior athletes at Cienega. But he was also a guy, I saw throw an interception on a screen pass. I saw hit an offensive lineman in the butt with a screen pass. Saw him make some really bad decisions with the ball. And so much of the quarterback play. If you want to compare him to Rhett Rod, who I saw play. Rhett Rod is one of the 5 best quarterbacks I saw play in Tucson. That also tells you about the quarterback play in Tucson. But Joyner's faster, he's stronger, he throws harder, but he's not as accurate, and he can't read a defense like he could. If you want to talk about guys who you want to go with the Bourget kid who's up at ASU, he was a better high school quarterback. Frankly, the difference between Joyner and a guy, if you followed football in Tucson, Justice Somerset, a kid who is now a high jumper at Arizona, they were far more similar. 2 of the best athletes on the field, could make plays. I saw Somerset run the 2-minute offense as good as anyone I've ever seen in football when he directed a Mountain View team on a 4-play, 75-yard, no timeout drive, and actually, of all things, hit Isaiah Lovett, the son of Lamont Lovett, color analyst for the Wildcat football radio, to beat a Tucson High team, now going 5-6 years ago. So I don't think Joyner is the answer. I think Joyner can give them an interesting wrinkle. Again, if you're willing to go read option, if you want to go run heavy, that could work. And again, he has a good arm. He can throw the football. But whether he's ready to play quarterback at the Power 5 level, I just don't see it. It'll be a fun experiment to see how they use him. And again, you can do some cool things with him. You can have him lined up at receiver, then come under center, or shotgun, have Cruz go flank out, have both of them in the backfield so you don't know where the ball is getting snapped. A lot of creativity can be had with a guy like Joyner, but again, I don't see it as the long-term solution. And frankly, the long-term solution is just not there for Arizona football. In terms of football recruiting, it was a mixed weekend. Arizona got a decommitment first, and then good news in a commitment. The decommitment coming from Zeke Berry, who unfortunately was one of the highest rated recruits for Arizona. Berry, the borderline 3-4 star cornerback from De La Salle High School in Northern California. Here is a guy who has put up some big numbers, made some huge plays, but once Michigan and some others got involved, it was always going to be tough to keep him. Doesn't sound very likely that Arizona can get back in on him, and that's a shame. But again, I think Barry's the type of guy Arizona needs to bring in, that kind of talent. He actually becomes technically the 4th decommitment in the class. When Sumlin was let go, Trayson Bourget and Kylon Grays decommitted. Grays was always going to be tough to get to Arizona. And Bourget was a guy I'm not sure the new staff had seen enough of to honor the commitment, although they would have, but I don't think they necessarily minded that one. The other guy was TJ Hall, an athlete from Fresno, who committed and decommitted very quickly. So losing Barry, yeah, a little bit of a loss. He's a talented player. Again, he's a borderline 4-star guy. Some of the sources have him 4-star. He would have come in, I think, and been pretty close to earning some playing time as a corner early in his career. Now, they replace him with a lower-rated player, but a guy who's very intriguing. Jacob Manu, a 3-star linebacker from Servite in Anaheim. Yes, Servite. It's the same school as Burnett and Fafita, and if you really want to extrapolate that, T-Mac. Manu, again, not the highest recruited guy. 24/7 Sports has him as a 3-star, top 150 linebacker. The composite has him barely missing on the top 1,000 in the country, but as a top 100 linebacker. The thing with Manu is he is undersized. He's about 5'11", 210, which is a concern in some ways, because he's small, and you wonder, does he project as a safety? Does he project as the Viper? But on the other hand, he's the type of player that Arizona can roll the dice on for a few reasons. First and foremost, he makes plays. His film is fun. His film is good. If he was 6'2", 220, he'd probably be a high 3-star, maybe even low 4-star type of guy. But, being undersized, and he's more of a fringe prospect. But I like Arizona rolling the dice on a guy who's, he reminds me of Jonah Coleman, the running back. A little bit small, a little bit undersized, but performs at a high level. And then, of course, the other thing is he comes from not only a winning school, but a winning school Arizona's recruiting well in. When you've now got 3 out of the 4 guys you want from that school, maybe you can try to convince T-Mac, although I think, again, that's probably well past. But, again, I like the pickup. I think this is a guy who can develop into a guy who can play. We might look back, and he seems like, one of those guys who Dick Tomey would have recruited, or maybe even Rich Rod. But, just an undersized, aggressive, high motor, talented guy. And I think he can fit in pretty well there. Arizona basketball goes to Media Day, and in what I find a slightly surprising move, the men's basketball team picked 4th, tied for 4th with Oregon State in the Pac-12 media poll. I thought they'd be 5th, 6th. Wasn't sure they were going to get a whole lot of credit from the media. But really, I think it went, a lot of the way I think it should have. UCLA and Oregon 1 and 2. They're the only ones to receive first place votes. UCLA by far and away the winner. I think maybe Oregon getting a little shortchanged there. USC 3rd. I completely understand it. Then Arizona, Oregon State tied for 4th. I think that's about right. A lot of people are high on Arizona State, bringing a lot of transfers, but I don't have confidence that they can mold those transfers together like a Dana Altman does at Oregon, where it seems like no matter what he does, he just throws those guys together. 2 players getting some honors. Ben Matherin being first team preseason All Pac-12. That's a 10-man team. And then Tubelis was named to the second team. And I think you can make some arguments that Tubelis is the better of the two and might be All Pac-12 first team when it's all said and done. When you look at the other guys on the list, it's hard to take any of them off. In fact, you could look at the other guys on the 5-man team, second team with Tubelis, and make arguments for them. And that's, again, how these lists usually work. So if you're getting up in arms over where Tubelis is or whatever, I wouldn't worry about it. Again, it's a preseason poll. No one's going to really remember. But I think it is interesting that I think they're getting far more credit than the women's team is. The women's team was picked to finish 5th. That shows that a lot of the media members are a little concerned about the lack of Aria McDonald. Secondarily, it also just shows you how good the Pac-12 is, because it's, again, hard to say Arizona is clearly better than any of the 4 teams ahead of them, although I think, you're a team that played in the national title game. You get most of the roster back, minus your best player, and that's significant and huge, but this is an Arizona basketball team that seems to be in pretty good shape when you factor in who else they got back with Thomas and Reese coming back for another year, players like Yanni, the transfers, and the other talented freshmen they've brought in, whether that's Coy Love or some of the others. So very high on Arizona women's basketball, but it really could be one of those things where they could finish 4th or 5th in the Pac-12 and still get a top 3 or 4 seed and still make a deep run. That's just how good the Pac-12 is in women's college basketball. Conversely, I think the men's league is down still. I think there's still a 4 or 5, maybe even 6 bid league. With the exception to me of Oregon and UCLA, I don't see a whole lot of high seeds unless, again, Arizona or USC can kind of find some magic. But I think you're probably looking at, UCLA being a top 2 or 3 seed, Oregon being a top 4 or 5 seed, then the rest of the league probably being somewhere in that 7 to 10 or 11 range. And again, Arizona plays a tough enough schedule that if they can string some wins together, that they can maybe carve out a higher one, and especially if they make a run in the Pac-12, which, again, I think is perfectly reasonable, but I don't know. Again, it's too hard to pick and predict that that's going to happen. Personally, I think they're probably, 3rd or 4th in the league. I think a lot of it depends on how does Tommy Lloyd adjust to coaching as a head coach. If you look at Jed Fish, I think he has had a lot of growing pains as a head coach. If Tommy Lloyd has some of those same growing pains, then you could see Arizona dropping a few games that they probably shouldn't this year. But if he can avoid those growing pains, if those are things that he has, thought about and worked on and molded while under the tutelage of Mark Few, then I could see Arizona, overcoming those. And when you also add a Steve Robinson, when you've got a guy like Jack Murphy, who, again, wasn't overly successful at NAU, but has been in these situations as a head coach, I think you've got a very nice staff to help guide Tommy Lloyd. And again, I'm expecting Arizona to be a tournament team. I expect Arizona to do well in the Pac-12. I just don't know if that means 22 wins and a 4th or 5th place finish, or could it be 27 wins and a 2nd place type finish? I just don't know. Probably somewhere in between. Some news on the IARP came out. Arizona, a lot of, it looks like, and if I'm reading it correctly, the arguments at least have been submitted, and now it comes down to a review process. There may be some follow-up stuff. Still looks like everything will be resolved more than likely in the spring of 22. So Arizona will unfortunately go in probably into another signing day, not necessarily knowing their fate. Again, talking to people I know around the university, the optimism is that Arizona will not be hit with another postseason ban. That seems, they believe, to be unlikely. There could be some scholarship limitations. There certainly will be some other recruiting restrictions, whether that's official visits, days on the road, other things. Expect Arizona to be affected in that regard. But the general belief is that because Arizona self-sanctioned, because Sean Miller is no longer in place, because they promptly did what they needed to do to get rid of Book Richardson, and frankly, because Arizona does have some counter-arguments to some of the charges brought up by the NCAA, they think the penalties will be stiff, but not overly significant. I listened to a lot of Van Halen this week in the name of science. That's right, Van Halen and science going hand in hand. So maybe that teacher that they were so hot for was a science teacher. But no, let me backtrack here. So when Eddie Van Halen passed away, I decided to do another deep dive into Van Halen. I've always been a Van Halen fan, at least since my teens. 1984 came out. I think I was 11 years old, 10 or 11, depending on exactly the date of release for that record. I liked it. I didn't know a lot of their other albums. Getting to high school, I start getting into, obviously rock and hard rock and heavy metal. The first Van Halen album I ever owned on cassette was OU812. And for the longest time, it was one of my top 10 or 15 favorite records. I grew up in my music forming years with Sammy Hagar as the lead singer of Van Halen. Now, one of the first CDs I ever bought was Van Halen 1, so I had appreciation for the David Lee Roth era as well. But saw Van Hagar, if you will, in concert 2 or 3 times. As I was in college, they were releasing, some of those monster albums. And so I always just kind of said I prefer Sammy Hagar. got a lot of flack for that. Obviously, the David Lee Roth fans, and for many, David Lee Roth, rightfully so, is synonymous with Van Halen. But I always just considered that I thought Sammy Hagar was a superior singer, which I still believe. Roth is obviously the better entertainer. And I thought more consistent songwriter, or a better songwriter. But then I decided to go in and actually do a track-by-track comparison. And I have to correct myself a little bit. I was right and I was wrong. The Hagar era was the more consistent era. There are more good songs, but less great songs. And I'm willing to concede that the top of the Roth era is better, at least in sheer number, than the Van Hagar era. Now, if you want to know what I did, is I listened track by track. If it was an instrumental or an intro, I combined it with the next track. If it was a novelty song, like Happy Trails, like Apolitical Blues, I didn't grade it. So by that metric, although I did grade Ice Cream Man, because Ice Cream Man is just so damn fun. The Roth era had 51 songs. The Hagar era only had 37 songs. By far and away, the best album, if you're looking at it, goes to Van Halen 1, which was an absolute juggernaut. Of the songs on the album, I gave most of them A's with 2 B's and a C. Not a big fan of Little Dreamer. Now, let me backtrack. There are songs that I don't love that I gave A's because of the cultural significance. To be honest, not a huge fan of, like, Dance the Night Away. Don't love it. But I can't deny that in the realm of classic rock, that thing's an absolute monster hit. So, just so you know. So, by my mathematics, and maybe math and rock don't belong together, the Roth era had 20 A's. That's 39% of their songs. 17 B's, that's 33%, and 14 C's. I will say this, what I learned is that some of the later albums seemed to mail it in a little bit, relied too heavily on cover songs, no matter how good some of those cover songs were. And there were a lot of songs where I just felt the lyrics and melodies did not match up with Eddie's riffs. Eddie's guitar playing was overshadowed, I think, some mediocre, especially in the verses. Choruses were strong under Roth, but some of the verses were more him talking than anything. Ironically enough, I think there's some Van Hagar songs where the verses are really good, and then the choruses just don't live up. So, 39% A, 33% B. For Van Hagar, I had 35% A's with 13, but 43% B's. Unfortunately, only 7% C's, but they also had a D. They also had an album with no A's. So they had the worst album of the group, and that was the last one, which I believe was Balance, which again was fine, was okay, had a lot of B's on there, a lot of B's and C's, but no A's. Although Feelin' and Not Enough are close, maybe even Can't Stop Loving You, but they just sounded like other versions of those songs. I will say this, with Van Hagar, they really relied on the power ballad and the pop-ier sound. So if you didn't like that, obviously you didn't care for Van Hagar, and I get it. And if you didn't like necessarily the covers or some of the, kitschier tunes, then I could see why you wouldn't like Roth. I also will say this, that the worst song in Van Halen's catalog that doesn't include the Gary Cherone album, which I did not cover, and I also didn't cover the album that came out a few years ago, which was basically a B-sides. They re-recorded some parts, so it was just the original Roth and original Hagar albums. But the worst song of the Van Halen catalog, at least under Roth and Hagar, was Pleasure Dome off the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge album. Still love me some Hagar, and still love me some Roth, still love me some Van Halen. But if you want the science, or my rankings, and again, mine can be biased. There's a few songs you may not have heard of I gave A's under Hagar, like Black and Blue. But at the end of the day, I think the best of Roth is better than the best of Hagar, but Hagar had more consistently well-written songs. Hate me? Maybe. Either way, Van Halen, great. Go check out Van Halen 1. Go check out 5150. Go check out Van Halen 2. Go check out... Just check any of them out. And that's it. Arizona football in some trouble. Arizona basketball, men's and women, with a lot of optimism heading into the season. And frankly, if you're into Van Halen, who I believe played McHale center. When I was in college, I didn't have tickets to that show, unfortunately. But if you saw that, or have been to Arizona Stadium, or frankly, are going to get out to McHale, any of it, just remember to bear down.